I2P and Tor, when to use which? The short answer is that if you want to do ClearNet web browsing anonymously, then Tor is the way to go. And for everything else, I2P is the better choice. And now I will be explaining in detail why that is the case. So, the difference between the Tor network and the I2P network is that, well, it's not really the difference. A big difference between Tor and I2P is that Tor requires specific people who specifically set out to host their nodes in the network. There are the entry, middle, and exit nodes. So a volunteer has to specifically set out to host their node. This will result in there being not that many nodes in comparison to how many people there are accessing the Tor network. That is one inherent flaw that is in Tor, whereas in I2P, every user is a node in the network. So each and every user is contributing to the network. So there isn't this difference between the people who host their nodes versus the users who use the network. Every user does both. So with that, I2P is better for many use cases, but that on its own is not the only difference. One big major difference, and this is what explains the statement at the beginning of this speech, is that I2P has not been designed to access the ClearNet at all, where in Tor there is the entry, exit, and middle nodes. Well, I2P does not really have exit nodes at all, where the traffic is designed to only exist in the I2P network. So accessing ClearNet sites outside of I2P from I2P, while it is possible, you have to connect to a specific person or whatever entity hosting that service for accessing the ClearNet. So basically it's called an out proxy. That's what it's called, and they are also like this sort of a volunteer who has to run the exit node similar to Tor, but there aren't actually that many of them, and you have to connect to a specific one. So you're not going to automatically connect to any random out proxy out there in the world. There's just a specific one that you have to target. So every user that is using that out proxy will come out of the same out proxy. So that is a bad idea then to use I2P for accessing ClearNet sites in such a way. It's not optimized for that purpose. So I would recommend against using I2P to access ClearNet sites. If you want to access ClearNet sites, use Tor, because Tor is specifically designed to access ClearNet sites. It is specifically built for the purpose of anonymizing traffic going to and from ClearNet sites. Whereas I2P is optimized for peer-to-peer communications and accessing EAP sites. EAP sites are the internal websites in the I2P network. Tor also has its own Onion websites, but I2P is superior for this purpose. There are lots of technological advantages to using I2P on top of the mentioned fact that everyone is a contributing node in the network. For example, the tunnels that are used are short-lived, so they don't actually I should say that in Tor, if you want to change the route that the traffic is taking, you have to manually restart that network. And yeah, that's a bad thing, and the network, it stays the same. The route the traffic is taking, it stays the same. You would need to change that manually, or it could be done so that it gets restarted every set time interval, but still, that's not really how it's good to be used. And also the tunnels, they are only one directional, so it route inputs and outputs, they both take their own independent route. And also the thing with I2P is that you can host multiple services on the I2P and they will all take their own routes throughout the I2P network. So yeah, those are some of the reasons that I2P is better than Tor. Because if you want to access a Tor Onion website, you are still relying on the same entry and middle nodes that are hosted by specific volunteers who do that thing. But then, accessing EAP sites on I2P, every user on the I2P is a node in the network, so there are more nodes. So the speeds, the transfer speeds and all kinds of things like that are potentially going to be way higher, and depending on the number of users and how their connections are, but it could be way higher. And then it's reliable. It's more reliable because there are more users to connect to more nodes. Where in the Tor network you only have however many Tor nodes are being hosted by the volunteers, so you only have that many nodes. Whereas in theory, the more people use I2P, the better the service gets. Whereas it's the opposite with Tor. If on Tor the number of nodes, the Tor routers being hosted stays the same, then the more users using, it slows down the network. Whereas on I2P, the more people are using it, the better the network gets, because then there are, by definition, more nodes on the network, because every user is a node. So they all contribute to the network, and it also makes the anonymity better also, because you have more nodes to connect to. So if you don't need to connect to ClearNet sites, which Tor is good for, then I2P is better for everything else. So if you want to host your own darknet website, you should use I2P instead of Tor, because I2P is better for that purpose. I2P handles better its own internal websites, the EAP sites, than Tor does. So yeah, that's one thing. And of course the peer-to-peer communications. Because peer-to-peer communications, when using I2P, they all inherently stay on the I2P network. If you're doing peer-to-peer communications with other users who are using I2P, and you are using I2P and you're all in the I2P network, then the traffic never needs to leave the I2P network. So the advantages of I2P network are the strongest here. And like I said earlier about the out proxy, like I said, it is technically possible to do that, but it's not recommended because of like how I explained it. So you really shouldn't do it. So I2P isn't really supposed to be used for accessing the ClearNet at all. In fact, lots of these I2P, I mean at least one I can think of, the I2PD software, it doesn't even come with out proxies configured by default. Because it really doesn't need to. Because you're not supposed to access the ClearNet with I2P. It can be done, so if you need to do it for some reason, and you're just using I2P, then you can go and do some ClearNet things. But that's not the intended use case. So you should use Tor for that purpose. Because Tor is inherently designed for that purpose. It seems to me that Onion websites on Tor are just an afterthought. It seems like that to me, where Tor is primarily intended for accessing ClearNet websites anonymously. Whereas I2P isn't even designed to access ClearNet websites at all. You are not meant to access ClearNet websites. So the out proxy is more of a hack. It's just a way to get out of the I2P network. So yeah, for accessing the ClearNet, use Tor. For everything else, use I2P. Right, so that's this speech. It's not that in-depth of an explanation on the technologies, but it's really just for anyone interested or curious about which one to use. Like, you don't need to be some very knowledgeable person on these technologies to use them, because everyone deserves to have privacy and all that. So this speech should be friendly to people who are not interested in technology all that much at all. But like I said, everyone deserves the privacy and all that stuff, so you should still use Tor and I2P even if you are not interested in technology and you're not all that knowledgeable on them. So perhaps for some target audience like that, this speech is useful. Right, so do use Tor and I2P. It's good stuff. Right, and that's it for this speech. Thanks for listening. Until next time, bye.